We're not talking horsepower here. We're talking snake power. Cobra! Hello everybody, Sparkster1701 here, and today we're going to be taking a look at something completely different from what we normally do here on the channel. We're taking a look at a G.I. Joe toy, since I decided to join in on Hooded Cobra Commander 788's annual Cobra Convergence month. So we're going to take a look at the 1983 Cobra HISS Tank and a HISS Tank driver. These guys were sold at retail in 1983. They would also be available in 1984. They would be discontinued from retail shelves in 1985, and both would go on to become mail-away exclusives. Now, of course, this particular tank is one of the mail-aways due to the unit marking number here on the side. The retail releases had either a fully red set of numbers, or the numbers would be clear with the red outline, like is shown here on this one. Would just have the numbers outlined and it would be clear, so it would basically be black numbers with a red outline. This one features white numbers inside a red outline, which was used for the mail-away version. Of course, I'd like to point out this toy is not part of my own collection. I did not have this growing up. This tank was contributed to me by viewers and supposedly future bosses, the Graves sisters, and probably their dog, Ein. I don't know how much help he was for this, but we'll credit him anyways, since he is a fan of the channel. At any rate, let's take a look at these individually. We'll start by taking a look here at the driver. The driver is done in the typical 3 3/4 scale action figure size. That was done back in 1983. As we can see, he's clad in a red uniform, complete with a red helmet, silver visor, and a black mouth and nose guard. It's a common joke that the Cobra troops were prepared for COVID because of their facial gear. And of course, on this blue splotch here on his chest, there's supposed to be a silver Cobra symbol on there, but the paint for that wears off very, very easily, since, as you can see here on this one, it does not have any traces of the silver. But taking a close look at the head, you can see there is a scratch on the silver paint there, so the silver paint back in the day was not very good. Anyway, appears to have some black gauntlets around the edges of his arms. The belt has a couple of painted pockets on each side, which we would presume would be for ammunition, but he doesn't come with a gun, so hopefully he's got some survival tools in there. And he has some pretty tall boots, but they do have some knee pads, so he can be somewhat comfortable if he's got to squat down to shoot at the enemy. Articulation-wise, he had what was standard for G.I. Joe figures back in 1983, meaning his head could turn from left to right. They didn't have the ball joint yet, so he can't look up and down. The arms, they raise up to about that far, and they can be rotated at the shoulder all the way around. You can bend his arms at the elbow, and they can be swiveled at the bicep, kind of like modern Transformers. These guys were held together with little rubber O-rings on the inside, so their torsos could move a bit. This one feels like it's still got a pretty good rubber O-ring in there. Their legs could spread apart so far. You could bend it at the hip almost 90 degrees, and he can bend at the knee. So, quite a range of articulation, especially when you compare that they were against Star Wars figures back in that day, and let's face it, this guy could be posed a lot easier than the average Star Wars guy. Now let's take a look here at the tank itself. Well, no, let's not for a moment. Let's talk a brief bit more about a HISS Tank driver. Now, while I don't have his actual file card, I do have a copy of it on my computer here to the side, courtesy of yojo.com. Card gives them a grade of 05, so it would be officer level 5 in the U.S. military scale of rank. They don't exactly have a specific birthplace, because these guys could come from anywhere. Primary specialty is HISS driver, obviously. Secondary military specialty is mechanical and electrical systems, which would come in handy if they have to repair the tank in the field. Cobra HISS drivers are selected from the best and most evil of Cobra Command's thousands of yearly recruits. Each is chosen for his physical strength and total dedication to evil. HISS drivers are graduates of Cobra Battle School Advanced Weapons Systems Training, qualified experts, HISS vehicle, Fang copter, knowledge of all NATO and G.I. Joe weapons. Which is good. It means they can identify most of the weapons used by NATO forces and the guns that G.I. Joe troopers would be using against them. But I find it interesting that they're also qualified experts to fly in the Fang helicopter. The Fang was also sold in the same year, 1983, but the Fang did not include a driver, whereas the HISS does include a driver. Usually you don't see somebody that's trained to drive a ground vehicle also trained to operate an air vehicle, but I guess it's possible. At the bottom of the file card, there's a quote stating, "Cobra HISS drivers are committed to the destruction of G.I. Joe. This newly developed battle vehicle is a real match for the G.I. Joe team. Beware." That sounds kind of flat in my eyes. But these guys are pretty generic, so you really don't have much to go with on them. However, as an added bit of trivia for the HISS driver, in the European Action Force line, the HISS driver was sold as a generic trooper and actually was sold with a red version of the snake armor. So, quite an interesting change when you consider how he was sold for a different toy line. Now let's of course take a look at the HISS tank itself. We'll start in the front of the vehicle here. You can see this thing is shaped trapezoidal in nature. Supposedly makes it have a decent profile. Although it does look weird. But here along the front, it does have a set of headlights, so that is a nice detail. And then right here we have the cockpit, which always seems to get a lot of flack from people. Since if this is intended to be glass, like what most of us expect it to be, then that would make it a dangerous obstacle, since it could be shot out very easily. Now, of course, one theory would be to go the Star Wars route and claim that it's transparent steel, or transparent steel as it's known in the lore, which is what all the cockpits are made of. Cockpits and many of the windows on the spacecraft are made of. And that stuff is apparently incredibly difficult to damage. But I don't think Destro had that in mind when he built this tank. Anyway, this thing just pops open. Mine's a little warped on this sample, so this one's seen a fair amount of action. Inside, if we can get it in a good light here, well, we do have a good light. We got a little tiny flash lantern here. It's got some nice detailed controls in here. That seat doesn't look all that comfortable, but it's a tank. What does one expect? At any rate, since it's built for a little guy to sit in here, we'll just set him on down in here. And then we just bring the canopy down and adjust it to the best of our abilities to close it up tight. There we go. That doesn't look too bad. And of course, right here we have the unit number. All the old ones from the 1980s were labeled 788. Many of the modern ones that they've been releasing have had different numbers. Moving on back, we'll take a look down here at the bottom. Take a look at the tank treads here. It's an interesting shape for the tread itself. Unfortunately, these aren't real treads on the toy, because as you can see on the bottom, it has a couple of dry wheels. But that allows it to easily roll across most surfaces. As you can see, it rolls pretty good here on this smooth table. Let's see, drag my computer here a little closer so I can read the blueprints here. Apparently along down here we have some ground equipment lockers, so they probably keep some repair tools and maybe some emergency weapons or rations are kept in there as well. And of course along the bottom we do have the armor skirts. And of course the tank drive bogies are here in the back. The fuel canisters are kept down under here. Yep, right in those areas there. And they are self-sealing, so it does protect them from losing too much fuel. It's nice to see that something of an obvious weak spot on the tank is covered. And of course, up here on the top, we have the tank's only weapon. It's a 90mm set of machine guns. According to the lore, they carry about 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Right up here in the front is an access to the motor drive for the cannon, so it can be repaired in the field. And there's apparently some communications equipment on here to allow the gunner to coordinate with the driver. I know one of the more modern HISS tanks came with a second driver guy to act as the gunner. But in the original toy, it didn't have anybody to be a dedicated gunner. Thankfully, the nice folks that donated this toy also were willing to bring it to send me a crew to operate it. So we got a regular Cobra guy. We can just drop here into the gunnery seat. Just like that. The whole section does rotate, so he does have 360-degree coverage. The guns used to be able to pivot upwards about that far, and they'd stay up, but the pins have broken. But according to many Joe and toy websites and YouTubers, those pins can be very easily repaired. So that's always a nice feature to have. Then we get back here to the back of the vehicle. It's just the camera here. There we go. The back of the vehicles, we can see down here at the bottom, there is what was known as a universal tow hook, which would allow the toy to tow some artillery pieces. Unfortunately, in 1983, Cobra did not have any artillery pieces. So all it could do would basically be hijack some G.I. Joe via artillery and take them for a ride. Although about a year later, Cobra would get their own in the form of the Assault System Pod, or ASP. Now, of course, here on the back, there's also a couple of foot pegs on this platform, meaning that it can carry along a couple of extra soldiers to help provide some cover fire for the tank. If nothing else, it would discourage some tailgaters. Although, unless they had an ASP or some other vehicle behind, something else back there being towed, they were completely exposed to enemy fire. But since we got a couple of guys here, they sent the Crimson Twins along as well, so Tomax and Zaymot like to live dangerously. So how's this for living dangerously? They can stand here on the back of the tank. Okay, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. There we go. That's better. And there we go. We got a HISS tank here, fully loaded, with a command crew with one driver, one gunner, and 2 extra passengers to provide cover fire. Now, of course, I like to look into the vehicles a little more in depth. That's always been a thing of mine. I like to know more about them and their lore. So I also got here this book, The Essential Guide, G.I. Joe vs. Cobra, written by Pablo Hidalgo. And yes, Star Wars fans, it is that Pablo Hidalgo. And here it does cover a bit about the HISS tank. And I'd like to share some of that with you. It states in here, it changes the guns on there to dorsal-mounted twin Diablo 30mm area fire automatic guns, but it still keeps them with 2,000 rounds. Some special equipment includes low-level light and infrared scanners, plus micro-resolution radar for high-speed vehicle maneuvering and personnel motion detection. The HISS tank can apparently drive at 75 miles per hour over the road and 60 miles per hour cross-country, which makes the HISS tank very, very fast. In fact, it even outclasses real-world tanks. Supposedly the fastest tank in the world is the Russian-made T-14 Armata, which has a top speed of roughly between 50 and 56 miles per hour. So a HISS tank can outrun a modern battle tank. And the HISS tank's maximum range is 275 miles per hour, 275 miles. So it can go quite a distance, although the Armada does have it beat on that, with it having an operational range of 310 miles. So, very, very interesting. The HISS tank was apparently designed by Mars Industries under the command of Cobra's operative Destro, as early on Cobra used various antiquated Warsaw-packed tanks that had been painted up with Cobra symbols. Probably due to the fact that's what Cobra Commander could get relatively easily and cheaply. However, as they proved to be ineffective against G.I. Joe's modern battle tanks, he had Destro and his company make something uniquely Cobra and could keep up with modern tanks. And this was the end result. Well, not entirely. There was apparently a larger version of this tank that had more specialities, including a lowering cockpit section that would allow the driver easy access. But that version was prone to damage, and the hydraulics for the cockpit could get stuck very easily, thus trapping the driver inside. So that version was apparently retired, but some of the design elements for it would be used in future tanks. We got this version shortly thereafter, and that became the mainstay of the Cobra battle tank. The Cobra HISS Tank weighs 9.75 tons. It's lightweight, using titanium alloy laminate hull armor to lessen the vehicle's mass. So that would obviously be a major flaw in the tank, is the fact that while it is fast, it can't take near as much punishment. That and the fact that it does have a very big blind spot in this area here underneath where the driver sits. To help compensate for that, HISS tanks are usually sent out in groups, so that way each one can come out in a staggered formation and they can keep an eye out for potential saboteurs. Or if no others are available, other smaller vehicles can often be sent with the HISS tank and again be there to guard the front end of the tank from saboteurs. Since the large size of this tank makes it a tempting target, but its speed makes it difficult to hit. The front silhouette is very thin. Does look like it, but probably not the best. The height and the shallow angle of the cannon mean that it cannot target enemies immediately flanking it. And I don't know, we turn this thing to the side, and unless I'm standing right under here, let's see, we put Slitherfang here right next to the tank tread. Yeah, Slitherfang could do some damage if he got right there. So that again increases the need for the tanks to be sent out in tandem or with other vehicles to protect it. The onboard electronics include low-level light and infrared scanners. These tend to make the HISS tank fairly visible to EM scanners. So unfortunately it can't hide its electromagnetic signature due to all the electronics in it, and the fact that it has also resisted attempts to be Pythonized to give it some more stealth. Now at this point, some of you may be asking me why I would be reviewing a G.I. Joe toy when I never had them. Well, I want to say that this comes full circle for me to participate in this. Hooded Cobra Commander 788 was the man that inspired me to start my channel on the Transformers. So this is my way of coming back full circle to him by doing this review. Plus also, the HISS tank has been used as apparent alternate modes for some Transformers, and 2 of them were released as toys. In 2012, one was done apparently to have been Shockwave. Shockwaves was done as a redeco of a tank that was used in the toy line from the second live-action G.I. Joe movie, Retaliation. They added to it an extra cannon to it to make it sort of resemble Shockwave's laser gun mode from the G1 era. That version of the tank included Destro as its driver, as well as a battle android trooper to be an extra figure, and probably man the turret. Destro also had with him a similarly scaled version of Soundwave and 3 cassette figures that were non-transformable. So I'm guessing Destro probably was playing some Scottish or Celtic battle music as he rode into battle in that tank. Probably more well-known to many of the fans was one that was put out in 2016, which was a somewhat redesigned version of this tank, which was done up in the colors of Soundwave. That one was released in 2016 at the Hasbro booth at San Diego Comic-Con. That one was a recolor of the 2005 version of the HISS Tank. And the missile launchers on that were somewhat redesigned, so they appeared to be the batteries used by Soundwave. That version came with Zartan as its driver, and it was sold in a 2-pack as it came with a Cobra Rattler jet painted up like Powerglide, and he had Scarlet as his pilot. So, pretty interesting features for this tank. Now we get down to my thoughts on it. What do I think of the HISS Tank? I know the HISS Tank gets a lot of flack from the modern day, as a lot of people do make fun of a lot of the glaring weaknesses that this tank had. But we gotta remember, this tank was a toy first, and a tank second. So, a lot of the features that are used for it certainly would not make any sense on a real tank. But, however, when you look down at some of the nitty-gritty stuff that has been incorporated into this tank and built up from its lore, it's actually a very effective fighting vehicle. Would it hold up against most modern tanks on the battlefield? Not really. It really wouldn't. But it certainly, with what it has, it can hold its own against most modern tanks. As I stated earlier in the video, its speed does make up for the fact that it doesn't have much in the way of armor. Now, there isn't much that can be done about the glowing weaknesses of the fact that its men are primarily pretty well exposed, but that's where the power of imagination comes in on that. And that's basically what we had when we were kids. But if we were to look at this tank in real life, it would probably fare pretty well in most battle arenas. I could see it being effective probably in city environments, as Cobra is a terrorist organization, so they're not going to fight by the normal rules of warfare that countries are obligated to fight under. And that would give it something of a distinctive advantage over most other tanks. As stated earlier, it can outrun even the fastest modern battle tank, but it doesn't have quite the range that that tank does. Nor would it obviously have the firepower, as it's limited to just the twin machine guns. But it would definitely be one that could be used to frightening efficiency against a group of soldiers that didn't have any other heavy armor to protect them. It would be able to handle itself somewhat against some aircraft, but probably not enough to really do it much good. It would need some other vehicles to protect it if they hear that air support is coming for their enemies. All in all, the HISS tank is, like we've said, it is a product of its time, but when you look down at the nitty-gritty about it, it's actually a very effective vehicle, and one that will likely remain synonymous with Cobra. Even the modern figures, as we've been shown, show pictures of the HISS tank. And what version are they showing? This one. So, the HISS tank will always be a part of Cobra in one form or another. And in a lot of ways, I hope it does stay that way. It is a very interesting and somewhat effective fighting vehicle. Anyway, that concludes my review of the Cobra HISS tank and its driver. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you like this video, drop me a thumbs up here on YouTube. If you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button so you can join our ranks, and ring the bell so you'll be notified when we post new content. Also, I ask that you share this video with your friends and fellow collectors of G.I. Joe or Transformers toys. That's what helps this channel grow. And share your thoughts about the HISS tank in the comments down below. This is Sparkster1701 saying, Cobra!